True patient love in all thy sons command. We're all brothers and sisters, all lives matter to the grave.
Did you hear that? Now that is a singer with a Canadian group that was entertaining last night. Helped sing the Canadian national anthem at the baseball All-Star game. We of course had the U.S. national anthem, but we have one team still in Canada, which is why you have the Canadian anthem often played at baseball games. He has been fired for changing up the lyrics. The rest of the group says they had no idea. They say they have no idea that he was going to do this. He changed up the lyrics in order to say that all lives matter. In other words, police officers' lives, not just black people's lives, but white people's lives, brown people's lives, red people's lives, yellow people's lives, green people's lives. He came right out and said it in the song. So he has been fired from the group. Now, Canadians, as you know, have this attitude that they're like Europeans. They think they're better than Americans. And I guess the question should be, will all of those countries that have put a man on the moon please raise their hands? Well, okay. How about all of those countries that have put men on the moon multiple times, please raise their hands? Right. So they all think they're better than us. We don't really know why. And Canadians during wintertime entertain themselves in one of two ways. One of those is to go out to an ice floe and club baby seals to death. The other is to go out on an ice rink and club each other. And yet, again, they think they're better than all of us when it comes to running a country and just living daily lives. I bring all of this up because I'm just a little disappointed that this happened. And there's a piece today at a website called SB Nation. Canadian All-Star Michael Saunders reacts to Anthem incident is the title. Now, Michael Saunders was the only Canadian-born player participating in the All-Star game last night. As it turns out, he's also the only Canadian-born player, I believe, who plays for the Toronto Blue Jays, which is the only Canadian-based team in Major League Baseball. He went on to say after the game he had no problem with the changing of the lyrics. In fact, he went on to say this. This is what I found fascinating. He and his teammate Edwin Encarnacion were standing there together at the game, and they were singing the lyrics themselves, so they didn't actually hear what happened. Because ball players get in what I like to call the zone. You know, they're thinking about the game, they're thinking about everything else going on, and everything else is shut out to them. So the anthem started, and they're just singing the lyrics on their own, and they didn't notice what happened. But someone told Saunders after the game, and this is what he had to say. I liked it. That was one of the better anthems I've actually ever heard. I enjoyed that one. In other words, he heard about what the singer said and agreed with it. And yet the singer is still fired for having done that. Now, you might say, well, it's an insult to the Canadian people and to their national anthem that the singer would go and change the words like that in order to honor Americans. Yet you've got a member of the Cleveland Browns football team the other day who actually tweeted a picture of a police officer having his throat slit by a guy who looked like he was from ISIS. And only after people complained did he take that down. But that's okay. He won't lose his job. He'll still be on the field this next year playing for one of the worst football teams in America. You've got women's basketball players who are showing up wearing their Black Lives Matter T-shirts. And that's okay. But somebody says all lives matter and he loses his job. What the heck is wrong with this picture, my friends? And I'll also mention, too, as well, that when it comes to national anthems, the words to the Canadian anthem are already being changed. By September, I believe it is, the Canadian anthem will have new lyrics because it was deemed to be politically incorrect. At one point during the anthem, at least the English version, there's a French version as well, because they have to appease everybody in Canada. I'm sure there's a left-handed version, and there's probably a Nunavut version, and probably an Eskimo version. And, got to make sure everybody out there isn't offended by something. But the English language version of the Canadian national anthem, which always had a line in it that read, "In all my sons command." Well, the women in comfortable shoes objected because it didn't say sons and daughters. And by the way, it didn't say, men and women, and we shouldn't refer to people as children anyway. And if you had said sons and daughters command, then it wouldn't match the musical tune. So the language had to be changed. So the Canadian government has changed the language to the anthem. And yet, a guy shows up at a ball game last night, offers that beautiful sentiment, and he gets canned. And the other guys in the singing group are offended by him as well. Sorry, then don't come back. You know what? The next time you show up at the border, we'll tell you, sorry, no admittance. 12 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Did you hear President Obama's speech yesterday at the memorial honoring the 5 Dallas police officers killed by that member of the Black nationalist movement last week? 45 times the president referenced himself, 2 as he was doing his warm-up remarks, and then 43 more times during the body of the speech. Now, as ridiculous as that may sound, his Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, was testifying before a House committee yesterday, answering questions about how Hillary Clinton got off scot-free. She refused to answer questions 74 times. For you liberals out there listening, that's almost 30 more than 45. So it's considerably, considerably more. I just thought I'd share that. If you'd like to reach our program today, the telephone number is 736-0300. That's 736-0300. So a memorial service for 5 dead people. The president not only kept referencing himself, telling jokes about Stevie Wonder as well, but he also called for gun confiscation and said that cops were racist. Now, I was looking at the cops sitting behind him. There were 2 black women, for instance, who were in that crowd. One may have been a cop. The other one, I couldn't tell. She wasn't in uniform. She may have been a member of city government. Who knows? She was the one who kept nodding in agreement with the president's remarks. But I noticed a lot of the other police officers just sat there stone-faced. This man, and they know it, he's not their friend. He doesn't have their backs. And they're well aware of that. 8:14. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning, and I thank you for joining me. Coming up in about 20 minutes, we'll be joined by one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. Going to be talking a little bit of your health today, and it gives you an opportunity as well to call the program, and if you have a medical question, you can get it answered by one of those folks while they're in the studio with us. When we talk a little bit about this Black Lives Matter movement and some of the people who are supporting it, there's a piece this morning that I found on one of the websites that I normally look at for my show prep. And I've got to be honest with you, right now I can't remember which one it was, but I found a video there, and the video was from a 1992 episode of a TV program called CBS 48 Hours, which actually once I was briefly part of. You heard me reporting in the background on a story and saw me standing there. In this winter of 1994, that was it. It was very cold, and I recall having to stand there, and I was in a ski jacket. But this is the Reverend Al Sharpton, who's been making a lot of noise about this Black Lives Matter situation, and, of course, dead motorists and dead people outside of convenience stores and the like, and everyone claiming police are vicious and mean, despite the evidence to the contrary. This is Al Sharpton from 24 years ago. And this is a piece about him on 48 Hours.
You know, wicked racists is like roaches. When you turn the light on, the roaches run for cover.
Sharpton is organizing a march to the Bronx,
So the way y'all, we agree.
the scene of the latest reported racial incidents.
Who's still dead? Who's still
The Reverend and his followers are the self-appointed avengers.
I think that hate is an emotion. I would love to use love, but if I've got to use hate, I'll deal with what my hand calls for.
So in other words, hate works for me. And then they had photographs of him walking around his offices in New York, which are, let me put it this way, they, at least at the time in 1992, were very, very plush. Now, just a few years ago, Leslie Stahl went up to New York and gave him a big wet kiss right on his bottom, doing a piece on him, a profile for 60 Minutes. And the offices are even nicer now. There's good money in this race hustling stuff, obviously. And he also admits that he's always enjoyed the spotlight.
I have an image of an angry black man. I am an angry black man. We're trying to raise an issue. It's solving racial justice. If someone murders someone, it should not be dependent on the skin color of the victim, on how they're punished. It should be equal protection under the law.
Now, we've been telling you the last few days that if this doesn't get settled sometime soon and things don't quiet down, we are headed toward a period in this country that could be something akin to civil war. And yet, we think it's just developed this year or since Ferguson, Missouri a couple of years ago, or since Trayvon Martin, or since Barack Obama took office. No, there have been people who've been looking to get this thing started now for a quarter century.
If I had to disturb race relations to aid racial justice, then fine. I plead guilty.
In other words, I don't care as long as I get what I want. If I create riots. Now, you got to remember, there are dead people behind this man. Now, he is responsible for the killing of people after some outbreaks of violence in New York that he encouraged. He encouraged these people because there was a local store owner he kept claiming was selling his wares to black people in the city and abusing them because he was selling them his wares and making a profit. Well, the guy's store got burned down. 8 people got killed. You also have some folks who were Jewish who were killed in various neighborhoods. If not necessarily directly at Al Sharpton's command, Al Sharpton created the rhetoric that led to those situations, the riots that broke out and then people dying. And he's still to this day unapologetic. 818, we have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. I liked Todd Starnes' commentary this morning. He said that Obama lit up the White House in pink when they legalized homosexual marriage. And something all these public school graduates need to understand out there is they can legalize anything, but they cannot make it lawful. He also said that with the union, the police union there in Texas, asking Benny to light up the White House in blue to honor these cops that were killed, he wouldn't do it.
Right. And he could have done it. And they could have put a black stripe across it as a memorial. Thank you for the call. As you see with the badges, when an officer is killed in the mourning period, you have the black tape across the badge, and you see some of the flags that are the same design. They could have done something like that. But Barack Obama knows the Democrat Party is not going to get the votes of these people. Al Sharpton, by the way, has changed his image slightly since 1992, trying to appear more mainstream. But I was looking at the hairdo that he was wearing in the piece from CBS from 1992, and it reminded me of something I'd long forgotten about. Yeah, we've got more coming up in just a few minutes, as I pointed out. Tripp Family Medicine coming up between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Better health with Tripp Family Medicine. Hope you can stick around for that. We've got plenty more on the way. Bill Colley with you. It's 8:20. And right now, it's 60 at News Radio 1310, KLIX, at newsradio1310.com. Do want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, Russell Singleton joining us from Tripp Family Medicine in just about 10 minutes. Russell's going to be talking about the effect that social media has on your life. That is Facebook and Twitter, and a lot of time we spend before these things, and unfortunately, maybe too much time. 824, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 61 right now. And, of course, telephone number if you'd like to reach our program. We're talking about the president's remarks in Dallas yesterday and, of course, some of the reaction from some of the other ne'er-do-wells in the Democrat Party to the latest, what we'd call, I guess, spat with the Black Lives Matter movement. Telephone number 736-0300, and you're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and you're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. Bill, I heard a professional malcontent the other day say, how would you feel if you were black and you woke up in America? I would ask him, how would you feel if you were black and you woke up in Rwanda or Somalia or one of these African countries where they get their drinking water out of a ditch?
Well said. I had a coworker. He was our chief engineer at a TV station I worked at, who was from Nigeria. He fled Nigeria. He'd been a government minister, but he also converted from his Islamic faith to Christianity and became a member of the Assemblies of God Church. And so therefore, there were people in his own country that wanted to kill him. So he moved for a time to Sydney, Australia. His wife had a job there teaching, and then they got a job. They both got work at UNLV, and then eventually they moved on to the East Coast, or pretty close to the East Coast. And so Biodun and I became pretty good friends at work, and we used to actually travel periodically on work-related issues. And So I had a lot of long conversations with him. And he told me one day, he said, people do not realize the opportunity that they have in this country. Let me tell you a bit about what my life was like in Nigeria. And I was considered part of the intelligentsia. He said, in Nigeria, if your boss comes into work in the morning, you're all supposed to stand at attention. And your boss will just as soon hit you and knock you down for no reason, and you have no recourse. He said, this is how life works there. And there's a story out on Christian Post today. A Christian minister, she went out to do some street preaching early one morning this past week. She got hacked to death. So, yeah, it's not a pretty picture. And again, the latest research shows us, a Harvard professor came up with this and said it even surprised him, that actually blacks are among the least likely to be shot and killed in an interaction with police officers in this country. That started a fight on CNN yesterday morning on the Chris Cuomo program because someone cited the facts and some of the black guests wouldn't believe it. They refused to believe it. And they were pointing out, well, this is not the only study that has come to this conclusion. It's peer-reviewed too. And they still refuse to believe it. Why? Because if they believe it, then they lose their narrative. Then people like Al Sharpton can't make a buck on all of the misery. This comes from the Daily Caller. Reverend Curtis Gatewood, field director for the NAACP's North Carolina branch and former second vice president for the North Carolina NAACP State Conference, wrote on Facebook that the Dallas shooter was defenseless and lynched. Gotta be kidding me. Yes, I'm going to the defense of the defenseless, he writes. That includes Micah X. Johnson, who has been accused of shooting about 12 police officers. And he said that he was not confident of Johnson's guilt, saying even if Micah was carrying a gun or rifle, that in of itself does not prove he murdered the police officers. How else were they supposed to get him to surrender? What, throw him a basketball? I mean, come on, folks. The guy had just shot up 12 cops. He was making more threats. He was claiming that bombs were going to go off all over the city. He refused to come out. What were they supposed to? We had a tingling caller about this the other day. What were they supposed to do? Send him some cake and ice cream and invite him to a birthday party? Is there something wrong with American liberals? Have they just smoked too much of the ganja that their brains no longer actually effectively work? I guess that's a rhetorical question now, isn't it? I also have this. This is from a piece I read this morning. Tammy Bruce. You may know Tammy Bruce. She's a syndicated talk show host, also a columnist for the Washington Times. She says, last year I warned on my radio show that the summer of 2016 would be a summer of race riots. They would be violent. The riots would be a reaction to a particular event or not, but they would actually be more of a pretext. The real issue, of course, would be the upcoming presidential election. Why? The left believes when you can't persuade on the issues, the goal is to intimidate and frighten people into accepting the liberal narrative and burning down cities and shooting police officers and using that as a pretense to take away people's firearms and the like. You know, we've pretty much put together that that's what this is really all about. And so there are folks in Washington, look, they made up their stories about, what was it, Benghazi a few years ago, and they didn't care that people all over the world then died in riots because of it. It got them 4 more years. Got them 4 more years over at the White House, the criminal gang that runs that operation. And now they don't care how many people die in the streets, as long as they get what they want. They could take away your guns, redistribute the wealth, and the facts be darned, as we said. You know, they can ignore and they'll argue and fight over actual studies that prove them to be wrong, because they can't have that. It's 8:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 60 right now. We have a guest coming up in a few minutes. Medical issues with Trip Family Medicine. That's on the way.